One of my main goals with the Fruit Grove is to inspire everyone to grow a fruit tree or shrub or something in their garden. And I really do believe that everybody can do that. But there are some easy mistakes to fall into if you're a novice at growing fruit. So I don't want that to hinder your success. So in this video, I'm going to share them with you and I'm going to tell you how to avoid them. So full disclosure, I have not actually been growing fruit for all that long. I mean, I think like a lot of people, I got into gardening almost accidentally. My dad gifted me some free seeds. I basically just threw them into an open patch of ground and I was completely hooked. So when I moved into my current house, I've got a pretty big backyard and I started just planting fruit trees here and there, and that's how this whole thing was born. Now what that means is I can really sympathize with the mistakes on this list because I have made most of them myself, and it really wasn't all that long ago. Fruit trees, fruit plants are an investment, and that means mistakes can seem very costly, not just the cost of a lost harvest one season, but in some cases the loss of the tree or the plant itself, which is actually costly in terms of money. But I don't want that to intimidate you because I'm here for you. I'm going to share how you can avoid these simple mistakes that I made when I first started growing fruit at home. Before we get into the meat of the video, if you like what you're seeing, please consider subscribing to my channel so that you can get more content about growing fruit at home. But now that that's out of the way, let's get to the list. The first fruit growing mistake that I want to point out to you is choosing the wrong type of fruit tree for your climate. And this is a mistake I have definitely made more than once. I am standing here beside this Meyer lemon tree, and believe it or not, this is the third Meyer lemon tree that I have grown because I killed the first two. When I moved here, I had some ideas of specifically what I wanted to grow. So I bought a Meyer lemon tree and I planted it here in the ground in the middle of my vegetable garden. And it was doing really well for a while until a couple of hard freezes hit, and that killed the tree. So I thought, okay, well, let me try it again next season. And then we had the coldest winter on record for my area. And once again, dead tree. So I learned that lesson finally. And my solution, because I still really wanted a Meyer lemon tree, was to plant it in a pot. And this pot lives right here in this spot through most of the year, but then I can wheel it into the garage as the temperatures start to get colder and we get those hard frosts. But really the solution is to pick fruit trees and shrubs in the first place that are going to thrive in your climate and in your conditions. The easiest way to figure that out is to go to your local nursery and ask the experts there. Find out if you need to plant something that's particularly heat and drought tolerant, or maybe you have really wet conditions and it needs to be able to withstand that. What are the disease pressures in your area? But believe me, you want to do this now. You want to choose the right trees for your climate because it will save you a lot of headache in the future. The second potential mistake is choosing the wrong location. Now, this is one I actually did right, but admittedly it was kind of by accident. Right after I moved here, I planted this apricot tree behind me, and I honestly did not think very hard about the location. But it turns out it was the exact right spot that this tree needed, and it really has been thriving ever since then. So when you're choosing a location to plant a fruit tree or shrub, you want to think about the 3 S's: sun, space, and soil. So for sun, pretty much every fruit tree or fruit shrub is going to need full sun, which means at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight per day. For spacing, that's where the plant tag can come in handy. Find out what the mature size of the plant is going to be and make sure you have that much clearance and that it has room to grow over the years. And then finally, soil, and more specifically, soil drainage. If you have really soggy, slow draining soil, that is one of the quickest ways to kill a fruit tree. So there's a really easy way to check your soil drainage, and I have a video on that I will link to so that you can do it yourself, because if you check the drainage, if you think about all of these location things, it really is going to save you a lot of trouble in the future, and your tree has a much better chance of surviving. The next easy fruit growing mistake to make is not watering enough the first year after planting. So what happens if you do this? Well, I can tell you, because these are not the first peach trees that I had in my garden. The first time around, I was doing okay watering until I went out of town during the hottest part of the summer and didn't make any plans for additional irrigation. So that did not work out well. The trees wilted and died and never came back. So I planted new ones. And this time, and this is the solution that I have for you, make some sort of irrigation plan. You have to water really frequently after you first plant just about anything, but it's especially crucial for fruit growing plants and trees. So when I say frequently, I mean probably at least a couple times a week for the first month or so, and then maybe every 7 to 10 days watering really deeply, depending on the temperature and overall rainfall that you're getting. If it's hotter, water more frequently. As the temperatures cool down, you can space out the watering. But I really recommend that you set up something automatic, whether it's drip irrigation, or I like to use these really great watering bags around my young trees because they emit the water over a longer period of time, so it gets nice and deep to the roots. Or at the very least, just make sure you have a garden hose that's long enough to reach whatever you've planted. The next one is not fertilizing in the early spring. And this is yet another one that I am guilty of. And I especially noticed it with this fig tree. When I first planted it, I didn't fertilize at all. And then I noticed throughout the growing season that the leaves were just a little pale instead of being the dark green that they usually are. And it seemed to just be growing a little slowly. And those are some signs that you can look for that tell you that a tree might be lacking in nutrients. Now, some of you may be lucky enough to have the ideal fertile, loamy soil that fruit trees love, and you may not need to fertilize at all. But for most of the rest of us, especially if, like me, you have really sandy, very quickly draining soil, fertilizer is essential because the soil just doesn't hold on to enough nutrients. So what's the solution? Well, there are some things that you can and should do to try to improve your soil over time, such as spreading a layer of mulch or shredded leaves or other organic material that's going to break down and enrich the soil. But really, just about every fruit tree in just about every garden is going to benefit from a dose of fertilizer in the early spring. So I like to choose a balanced organic granular fertilizer, and you want to do this right at the beginning of spring, just as you're noticing those first signs of new green growth beginning. The next mistake is forgetting about pollination. Some fruit trees and shrubs need to be cross-pollinated in order to bear fruit. Now this means there needs to be another variety of the same plant nearby so that the pollinators can bring pollen back and forth between the flowers, which is of course how the plant sets fruit. There are other fruit trees, many of them, that are technically self-pollinating, meaning you only need one tree in order to get fruit. But most of the time, even those will fruit more prolifically and more consistently if there is a pollination partner nearby. And that is true for many things. I have one pomegranate tree and one apricot tree, and they both do fine, but I think they'd do better if I have a second. But things like blueberry bushes, a lot of plum trees, many persimmon trees, and other things too often need two trees to fruit, although not always. So that really is the solution, is do your research into whatever you're planting. Look at the plant tag, find out if you're planting something that's self-pollinating or if you need to plant two trees in order to get fruit. And go ahead and plan for that now before you realize you don't have enough space for two trees. Another really easy mistake to make is not protecting your young trees. So just a fair warning, rodents and squirrels and other animals love to nibble on the tender, soft bark of a young tree. That is what happened to this plum tree behind me when it was younger. And so I had to figure out really quickly, how can I protect the trees? Another problem is sun scald, which is the intense sunlight, whether it be in the summer or in the winter. It can actually damage the cells of the bark and of the trunk. So you have to protect your trees in some way, especially when they're young. And there's some really simple ways to do that, either with reflective tree paint, like I've used. It's an organic product and it works really well to keep the sunlight reflected and to keep the animals away. Or in the winter, I like to wrap all of my trees with this tree tape that basically does the same thing and expands as the tree grows. Or you can just buy some sort of plastic or metal cage or some sort of other protector, at the very least, to keep animals away, to keep lawnmowers and string trimmers away. All of these things can really easily damage young fruit trees. Another fruit growing mistake is avoiding pruning. Now, technically I haven't made this mistake yet. This is a pomegranate tree that definitely needs pruning, but I only planted it this spring, so I'll be pruning it for the first time in just a few weeks. So keep your eyes peeled for a video on that. But learning to prune fruit trees can be a little intimidating, but not pruning is potentially even worse. Not pruning your tree leaves it more susceptible to issues from pests and diseases because of crowded growth. It messes up the airflow. It can also prevent you from having a larger harvest because all of the tree's resources are going to go to supporting all of that growth rather than fruiting. And on top of it, as the tree grows bigger and bigger, it's going to be harder and harder to reach the fruit. So the solution is to grab your shears and do a little pruning. In general, for most fruit trees, just a little bit of pruning every year is all you're going to need. I have a lot of resources on the Fruit Grove blog, and I have some pruning videos that are going to be coming out soon. But some general principles that you can follow are to thin out crowded growth like this, to shorten overly long branches, and to get rid of anything that is damaged or diseased. I promise you will see a huge result from even minimal pruning effort. It is definitely worth it to not make this mistake. The next mistake is specifically for fruit trees and plants grown in containers, and that is keeping it too long in the same pot. So every 3 or so years, you're going to want to repot your fruit tree. And that's not just to give it a bigger pot as it grows, but also just to refresh the potting soil. A really densely packed root ball that is stuck in old, dusty, kind of depleted potting soil is not going to give you a good fruit harvest year after year. So you need to give it some new potting soil, some new growing medium so that it can really flourish. The solution is to repot your potted fruit trees roughly every 3 or so years. That is what I need to do with this key lime tree. It keeps tipping over in the wind. It has definitely outgrown its current pot. But if you want to see how I did this, I do have another video showing how to repot fruit trees. But I guarantee you will see a pretty immediate difference in how well the tree grows and what kind of harvest you get. The next one isn't so much about growing, but it can actually make or break your fruit harvest. And that is not picking your fruit at the right time. I'm standing here by my blackberry bushes, and when it comes to growing the sweetest blackberries you can imagine, the number one thing to do is wait until the exact right time to harvest, because that ensures the most sugars develop in the fruit. So the same is true for just about every other fruit. I mean, I'm thinking apricots, peaches, persimmons, pomegranates, citrus, everything else. If you wait till just the right time, you'll get peak flavor. So for blackberries, for example, you want to wait until the shiny black skin turns a little bit more dull and matte, and the blackberries should just practically fall off the bush into your hand. For citrus, you want to wait until the rind has smoothed out a bit. It's not as bumpy, and it should definitely have some give. It shouldn't be too hard. And again, you'll notice that the fruit just sort of pops off with very little tugging. So that's the solution, is to learn the best time to harvest your fruit, so that way you get the absolute best flavor that you can imagine from your homegrown fruit. And finally, the last and biggest mistake you can make when it comes to growing fruit is simply not to try at all. I mean, after all, it's better to try, make some missteps, and then try again armed with that new knowledge and experience that you've gained through your own mistakes. I mean, that's what I did. That is what I continue to do as I try new things all the time in my garden. So let me know in the comments, what fruits are you trying to grow? What mistakes have you made, and what have you learned from them? I really hope this inspires you to try some new things, try growing some new fruits in your garden, even if you're not entirely sure how it's going to turn out. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.